This 69-ton French tank was a WWI giant lost in WWII, June 15, 1940. A French railway worker watches 10 massive tanks sitting motionless on rail cars. Each one is over 39 feet long, longer than a city bus. They weigh 69 tons, twice as heavy as any British tank of World War I. These are the Char 2C super heavy tanks, the largest operational tanks ever built. Each one has been named after a French region like a battleship: Champagne, Normandy, Alsace. They're fleeing south away from the German blitzkrieg tearing through France. Then a fuel train ahead catches fire. The railway is blocked. The tanks can't move. They're too massive to drive off the rail cars. German forces are hours away. French crews plant explosive charges in their own tanks and detonate them. 10 tanks that survived 21 years without firing a shot in combat are destroyed by their own side to prevent capture. One survives almost intact. The Germans parade it through Berlin as a trophy. This is the story of a tank designed to win World War I that arrived too late, became a propaganda symbol, and died without ever fighting the war it was built for. Summer 1916. General Léon Muret, France's Subsecretary of Artillery, verbally grants a contract to Forges et Chantiers de la Méditerranée, FCM, a shipyard near Toulon, to develop a heavy tank. A shipyard, not a vehicle manufacturer. A shipyard. That detail foreshadows everything about the Char 2C. The context matters. British tanks have just appeared on the Somme in September 1916. They're crude, slow, and unreliable. But they cross trenches and crush barbed wire. The French are humiliated. The British beat them to fielding tanks. French Minister of Armaments Albert Thomas is furious. On January 23, 1917, he orders French tanks that are faster, more powerfully armed, and more heavily armored than anything the British have. He specifies a weight of 40 tons, immunity against light artillery, and the ability to cross 3.5-meter trenches. Meanwhile, Louis Renault's team is designing the revolutionary Renault FT, the first tank with a rotating turret, the template for every modern tank. But Renault's engineer, Rodolphe Ernst Metzmeyer, has also been secretly working on a heavy tank design. The design is presented to the Consultative Committee on January 16 to 17, 1917. It's the most advanced tank concept in the world. It features a 105-millimeter gun in a turret and proposes 35-millimeter armor with a weight of 38 tons. General Estienne, commander of French armored forces, is skeptical. He fears this monster will drain resources from the Renault FT, which can actually be mass-produced. He convinces higher command to slow the project down. But political pressure is enormous. France must have tanks to match Britain. The committee decides to develop two prototypes, one with electrical transmission and one with hydraulic transmission. By late 1917, the FCM-1A prototype is completed, a 38-ton tank with a 105-millimeter howitzer and 30-millimeter armor. It's enormous. It works. French authorities are impressed enough to order the heavier C variant for production. In 1918, Marshal Pétain orders 300 Char 2Cs to be ready by March 1919 for the spring offensive. The scale of this order is insane. France's tank industry barely exists. Building 300 of these monsters requires labor and steel France doesn't have. Engineers estimate it's impossible. But the order stands because the French High Command believes these breakthrough tanks will smash through German lines and end the war. November 11, 1918. The armistice is signed. Not a single Char 2C has been completed. The massive industrial mobilization becomes pointless overnight. The war is over. The urgency evaporates. But here's where politics overrides military logic. French heavy industry has enormous surplus capacity after the war ends. There's political pressure to keep factories running and workers employed. In April 1919, the Direction de l'Artillerie d'Assaut decides to procure 10 Char 2Cs anyway, partly to justify rejecting other expensive tank projects, partly because France wants to demonstrate it has the world's most advanced tanks. All 10 tanks are delivered in 1921 and modified until 1923. Let's talk about what FCM actually built, Because the Char 2C defies belief. Length, 10.27 meters, over 33 feet, with the rear trench crossing tail attached, over 12 meters, 39 feet. Width, 3 meters. Height, 4.10 meters, nearly 13.5 feet tall. Weight, 69 tons. To put this in perspective, the Char 2C weighed twice as much as Britain's heaviest tank and 10 times more than the Renault FT. No operational tank would match its weight until the German Tiger II in 1944, 23 years later. The crew? 12 men. Driver, commander, gunner, loader, 4 machine gunners, mechanic, electrician, assistant electrician / mechanic, and radio operator. 12 people to operate one tank. That's more crew than a B-17 bomber. The main turret was the first 3-man turret in history with separated roles for loader, gunner, and commander. Armament, 1 75mm main gun, 1 forward-facing 8mm Hotchkiss machine gun, 1 rear-facing 8mm Hotchkiss, and 2 more 8mm Hotchkiss guns in side positions. 4 machine guns covering every direction. This thing has a rear-facing machine gun because it's so long that enemies might attack from behind while the front is still advancing. Propulsion, 2 engines producing 520 horsepower total, either Daimler or Maybach 6-cylinder engines. Later, captured German Mercedes engines were installed. Despite the weight, it could reach 12 kilometers per hour, 7.5 miles per hour. That's almost twice as fast as the British Mark I, which weighed half as much. Armor, 45 millimeters on the front of the hull, 35 millimeters around the main turret, 22 millimeters on the sides, 13 millimeters on the roof. At the time of introduction, this was among the thickest armor in the world. Fuel capacity, 1,260 liters in 7 fuel tanks, giving a range of about 150 kilometers, 93 miles. That's actually respectable for a 69-ton vehicle in 1921. But here's the critical detail everyone misses. The tanks were fitted with a rear skid tail for trench crossing in 1921. French military leadership in 1939 still believed future wars would be fought strictly along the lines of World War I trench warfare. They built these tanks to cross trenches that would never exist again. The 10 tanks were named after French regions: Berry, Provence, Touraine, Poitou, Picardie, Normandy, Alsace, Bretagne, Anjou, and Champagne. Like battleships, because France wanted them to feel like capital ships, symbols of national power. They were renumbered 90 to 99 in 1939. They formed various units, reorganized until they eventually comprised just 3 units, mainly shown for propaganda purposes. Each tank was kept from enemy fire at all costs, with their reputation being one of invincibility and power, where the sheer sight of the machine sent the enemy running. This is where the Char 2C found its true purpose, not as a weapon, but as theater. Newsreels show these monsters rumbling through Paris during military parades. Crowds gape at them. The message is clear. France has the most powerful tanks in the world. Don't mess with France. But reality is creeping in. By 1930 standards, the Char 2C is too slow, too heavy, and has poor armor. Anti-tank weapons have evolved. By World War II standards, the Char 2C is extremely vulnerable to most types of anti-tank fire. Unsurprisingly, they're also unreliable, with tanks frequently withdrawn for repairs. Transportation is a nightmare. They can't be transported by road, so they have to go by rail. But they're too tall to simply sit on a flat car, so a special 2-piece rail car was developed that suspends the Char 2C by both ends to lower its height on the train. Loading a 2C onto one of these rail cars allegedly takes up to 4 hours, involving no less than 4 35-ton hydraulic jacks. France attempts upgrades. From 1923 to 1926, tank number 9, Champagne, is converted into the Char 2C Bez, mounting a 155mm howitzer in a rounded cast steel turret. New Suter Harley engines are installed, and the machine gun positions are deleted. In this configuration, the tank weighs close to 74 tons. But after 1934, it's brought back to its previous condition. More significantly, between November 15th and December 15th, 1939, The Lorraine, previously Normandy, is experimentally up-armored at the Société des Aciéries Domcourt to make it immune to standard German anti-tank guns. The front armor is enhanced to 90 millimeters, the sides to 65 millimeters. In this configuration, weighing about 75 tons, the Lorraine has the thickest armor of any operational tank at that time. The up-armoring makes it a much more effective tank by World War II standards. The director of Home Court informs the French military that the factory can upgrade 6 more tanks for an estimated 1 million francs. The proposal doesn't happen. Only one tank gets upgraded. Why? Because by 1939, everyone knows these tanks are obsolete. September 1939, Germany invades Poland. World War II begins. All 10 Char 2C tanks are operational. They're grouped into the 51st Bataillon de Chars de Combat, their own dedicated battalion. The tanks are already obsolete, slow, and too easily vulnerable, but are still used for propaganda purposes. They're deliberately not used in battle. Think about that. France has 10 operational super heavy tanks and refuses to commit them to combat because they're more valuable as symbols than as weapons. May 10th, 1940. Germany invades France. The blitzkrieg begins. German panzer divisions, using coordinated tank infantry air tactics, slice through French defenses. The phony war ends in catastrophe. Within weeks, the situation is desperate. After the Third Reich breaks through French lines, the decision falls on June 10, 1940, to move the Char 2C southward. All 10 tanks are loaded onto their special rail cars. The plan is to evacuate them deep into southern France, perhaps to North Africa, anywhere the Germans can't reach them. These tanks have never fired a shot in combat, but they're symbols of French military prestige. They must be saved. The transport train is stopped by a burning fuel train on June 15, 1940. The railway is blocked. The tanks are trapped. German forces are advancing rapidly. The situation is hopeless. The tanks are too massive to unload and drive away. It would take hours to get even one off the rail cars with hydraulic jacks, and there's no time. German mechanized units could arrive at any moment. The crews face an agonizing decision. The decision is made to prevent capture of the famous equipment. On June 15th, charges are detonated to destroy the tanks. French crews destroy their own tanks. Tanks that survived 21 years. Tanks named after French provinces. Tanks that represented national pride. Later, Goebbels and Goering claimed the tanks were destroyed by German dive bombers. This propaganda lie is repeated by many sources. The truth is less dramatic but more tragic. They destroyed themselves because they couldn't escape. One tank, Champagne, is captured more or less intact and brought to Berlin to be exhibited as a war trophy. In 1948, this tank disappears, causing speculation it survives at the Russian Tank Museum in Kubinka. It doesn't. Champagne is gone, likely scrapped by the Soviets after study. So what went wrong? How does the largest operational tank ever built never fire a shot in combat? First, strategic obsolescence. The Char 2C was designed for World War I, breakthrough operations, punching through prepared trench systems, crossing massive defensive works, overwhelming fortifications with firepower and armor. By 1940, that war doesn't exist anymore. World War II is about mobility, speed, combined arms coordination. The Char 2C is purpose-built for a war that ended 22 years ago. Second, the transportation problem. Special rail cars had to be designed because these tanks couldn't be moved any other way. They had wide turning radii and were hard to maneuver. In mobile warfare, if you can't deploy your tanks where needed, you don't have tanks. You have decorations. Third, the crew requirement. 12 men per tank. A normal tank battalion requires hundreds of trained crewmen. The Char 2C battalion requires over 120 just for the 10 tanks, plus support personnel. That's an entire company of skilled specialists dedicated to 10 vehicles. The resource inefficiency is staggering. Fourth, reliability. The tanks were frequently withdrawn for repairs. Mechanics, electricians, and assistants were present specifically to service the drivetrain and electrical systems during action because problems were common. A tank that constantly breaks down can't fight. Fifth, armor inadequacy. Yes, the up-armored Lorraine Normandy had 90 millimeter frontal armor, the thickest of any operational tank in 1940. but 9 other Char 2Cs had 45mm frontal armor. German 37mm and 50mm anti-tank guns could penetrate that at combat ranges. The psychological advantage of size meant nothing against modern anti-tank weapons. Compare this to Germany's approach. They built thousands of Panzer IIIs and IVs, medium tanks that could be produced quickly, transported easily, and maintained in the field. Or the Soviet T-34, designed specifically for mass production and reliability over individual superiority. Or the American Sherman, engineered for ease of manufacture and repair. France built 10 handcrafted battleships on tracks, named them after provinces, paraded them for newsreels. And when war came, they couldn't use them because moving them required special trains, deploying them required perfect conditions, and risking them was politically unacceptable. There's a deeper story here about military procurement and national psychology. The Char 2C represents the French military's fundamental misunderstanding of the next war. France spent the interwar period preparing to refight World War I with better equipment. The Maginot Line, heavy fortifications, powerful but immobile artillery, and these massive breakthrough tanks. Germany prepared to fight a different war entirely, one based on mobility, coordination, and tactical flexibility. The blitzkrieg wasn't about having the best individual weapons. It was about combining adequate weapons in ways that overwhelmed the enemy's ability to respond. As late as 1920, France proposed building a 600-ton tank with 250mm armor. 600 tons. That's not a tank. That's a mobile fortress. The fact that serious people proposed this shows how deeply French military thinking was stuck in 1918. The Char 2C could have been useful in very specific scenarios. Urban warfare where its firepower could demolish fortifications, static defensive positions where its armor could withstand attacks, psychological operations where its mere appearance intimidated enemies. But none of these scenarios materialized in May-June 1940 because the war moved too fast for the Char 2C to reach any battlefield. The tanks effectively never engaged the enemy or fired a single shot in anger. The FCM-2C remains the only super heavy tank produced in series and used operationally in any army, if operationally means existed in military service rather than actually fought. Some historians argue the Char 2C's real value was propaganda, and on that measure it succeeded. For 20 years it projected French military power. It intimidated potential enemies. It boosted civilian morale. Those are legitimate military functions. But propaganda value means nothing when war actually comes and you need weapons that work. The final indignity, German propaganda claimed Stukas destroyed the Char 2C convoy. This lie persisted for decades. The Germans took credit for destroying tanks that destroyed themselves, and France couldn't even correct the record without admitting the humiliating truth. The world's largest tanks died trapped on a train, unable to escape, blown up by their own crews because they were too massive to save. Today, no Char 2C survives. Champagne was captured, studied, displayed in Berlin, and vanished sometime after 1948. The other 9 were deliberately destroyed on that railway in June 1940. A few components might exist in museums, but the actual tanks are gone. The largest operational tanks ever built left almost no physical trace. What they left instead is a cautionary tale about preparation for the last war instead of the next one, about building weapons for prestige rather than practicality, about confusing propaganda value with military effectiveness, about the danger of creating weapons so precious you can't risk using them. The Char 2C weighed 69 tons, was over 12 meters long with its tail, and had armor that was among the thickest of World War I-era tanks. It was genuinely impressive. It represented serious engineering achievement. It inspired many design choices featured on other heavy and super heavy tank designs of the interwar period. But impressive engineering doesn't win wars. Practical weapons win wars. The Char 2C was designed for breakthrough operations in 1919. It entered service in 1921. By 1940, it was a museum piece pretending to be relevant. The 9 years from design to deployment saw the entire nature of warfare evolve. The additional 19 years until World War II made it completely obsolete. France learned this lesson the hard way. After 1940, French tank design, what little happened under Vichy or Free French forces, focused on mobility and practicality. The dream of super-heavy breakthrough tanks died on that railway alongside the Char 2Cs. The Germans briefly flirted with super-heavy tanks, the Maus, the E-100, the utterly insane Land Cruiser proposals. None were successful. The Soviets experimented with multi-turret heavy tanks. None were successful. The lesson was clear. Bigger isn't better. More isn't better. Practical and deployable is better. The Char 2C stands as monument to a dead end in tank development. It was the largest. It was impressive. It was obsolete before it fired a shot. And when France needed it most, it couldn't save itself, let alone save France. If this exploration of the world's largest operational tank grabbed you, that like helps others discover these deep dives into military history's forgotten giants. Subscribe for more investigations into weapons that looked invincible but proved useless, or sometimes succeeded despite impossible odds. What other interwar military disasters should I cover? The Italian Caro Armato P-40 that arrived too late? The Soviet T-35 multi-turret monster? The British TOG-2 that took the wrong lessons from WWI? Drop your suggestions below. Every comment shapes future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next historical tragedy.